so we proceed with net present value. We are discussing on project evaluation techniques. And we evaluated the net present value. And we left now to look at the advantages of NPV. So just a quick recap. We see that NPV is the difference between the present value of cash inflow and the present value of cash outflow. In that the NPV is the present value of cash inflow minus the present value of cash outflow. Then we see that when evaluating a project using this discounting technique, NPV, of which the most appropriate method, you should only undertake a project if NPV is positive. We also looked at the effect of the working capital. We say that working capital is current asset minus current liability. If we're evaluating a project using the net present value, where there is a presence of working capital, we see that working capital is an outflow at the beginning and then becomes an inflow at the end. Good. So now we have to start on advantages of NPV. We like to say that number one, advantages of NPV. It takes into account time value of money. It takes into account time value of money. Number two, it uses cash flows. It uses cash flows to evaluate a project. It uses cash flows to evaluate a project. It doesn't use accounting profit. You see, accounting profit, they are prone to manipulation, but you cannot manipulate the cash flow. Number three, it uses all cash flows. It uses all cash flows to evaluate a project. It uses all cash flows. It uses all cash flows to evaluate a project. It uses all cash flows to evaluate a project. Another one, it gives a clear decision. It gives a clear decision. It gives a clear decision on whether to accept or reject a project. It gives a clear decision on whether to accept or reject, a project. Another one, it is consistent with the shareholders' goal. It is consistent with shareholders' goal of wealth maximization. It is consistent with shareholders' goal of wealth maximization. Wealth maximization. Now let's look at disadvantages. Disadvantages. Let me see that. Cash flows used to evaluate the project. Cash flows used to evaluate the project. Cash flows used to evaluate the project are usually estimates. Cash flows used to evaluate the project are usually estimates. Number two, it assumes the cost of capital will remain constant. It assumes cost of capital will remain constant over the project economic life. It assumes that cost of capital will remain constant over the project economic life. Another disadvantage. Sometimes NPV conflicts with IRR. Yeah, shall come to evaluate IRR. That's the internal rate of return. Sometimes they give a conflicting results. NPV is saying you accept, IRR is saying you reject. But we shall see what gives rise to the conflict between the two. So now that's all about the net present value. We are looking at the discounting technique. So the other discounting technique, number 4, was the profitability index. Profitability index. PI, profitability index. Profitability index. We like to see that? This is a relative measure of performance. This is a relative measure of performance determined as follows. The relative measure of performance determined as follows. So profitability index, you take the present value of cash inflow, you divide by the present value of cash outflows. Yeah, that's how you get the profitability index. The present, in short, is the ratio between the inflow and the outflow. Then you have to see that. It indicates the returns. It indicates the returns for every shilling invested. It indicates the returns for every shilling, invested. Full stop. Decision criteria is as follows. Decision criteria is as follows. Number one, if the profitability index is greater than 1, you accept the project. Number 2, if profitability index is less than 1, you reject the project. And then number 3, if profitability index is equals to 1, that means the inflow and the outflow are the same. That means the NPV is 0. So that's what we call the point of indifference. Yeah, that means you can either accept or reject that project since NPV is 0 or the inflow and the outflow are the same. Yeah, that's the decision criteria. Saying that if the profitability index is greater than 1, that's when you accept. What does it mean? So you're saying that the profitability index is the ratio of the inflow and the outflow. So if the inflow are more than the outflow, automatically NPV will be positive. And therefore, if the inflow is more than the outflow, the profitability index will be greater than 1. For example, if we take a scenario that if the present value of cash inflow is 30 and the outflow is 20, 3 over 2 get 1.5. So automatically that means you accept the project since the inflow are more than the outflow. What if it's the other way around? That the present value of cash inflow is 20 and the present value of cash outflow was 30. 2 over 3, you get 0.67. That means the profitability index is less than 1. So that means in this case, the outflows were more than the inflow. Automatically reject the project. If the PI is 1, that means inflow and outflow are the same. If the inflow was 30 and outflow was 30, what do you get? 30 over 30 you get? You get 1. So that means the inflow and the outflow are the same. So that's what we call the point of indifference. Then you write another paragraph, right? You see that? PI, that means the profitability index. PI, it's applied when the company, PI is applied when the company is facing capital rationing. Capital rationing. PI is applied when the company is facing capital rationing. So now I want us to define capital rationing. Subheading, capital rationing. We like to say that this is the scarcity of investment fund. This is the scarcity of the investment funds. This is the scarcity of the investment funds to undertake all viable projects. This is the scarcity of investment funds to undertake all viable project, to undertake all viable projects. Yeah. Then let me see that. There are two types of capital rationing. There are two types of capital rationing. There are two types of capital rationing. A, soft stroke internally generated capital rationing. And number B, we have hard or externally generated capital rationing. Yeah, so you're saying that the capital rationing, this where the company is facing some financial constraint to undertake all viable projects. Now, assuming that we had 3 projects, project A, project B, project C. Then we have the cost. Project A requires 30, project B requires 40 million, C requires that million. So that means the total capital required is 100 million. Then the expected NPV of this project, assume A will give 10 million, that's the profit, NPV is the profit. B will give 15 million, C maybe will give 12 million. What does it mean? Now assume these projects are independent. You see that what are independent projects? The project that does not interfere with each other, are you together? So that means if this project, they require a capital of 100 million and all the NPVs are positive, that means all the projects are viable. If you have sufficient capital, just undertake all the project. But in this case, this project requires 100 million, but the company only has 90 million. So there is a shortage of how much? 10. Now that's what now we call capital rationing. Saying that this is where the company have insufficient fund to undertake all the viable projects. Now in this case, you cannot use NPV. You cannot use NPV. You see that if the projects are mutually exclusive, you see that mutually exclusive projects, they are projects which compete against each other. So just select the one with the highest NPV, right? But we're saying that this project, all of them, they're dependent. And as you can see the capital, they are not the same. So that means the size of the project is not the same. So therefore you cannot use NPV. You cannot use NPV to rank this project. So what happens now, that's when you evaluate using profitability index to look at the ratio of the input and the output. For example, if you take project A, project A, can you give me the profitability index of project A? Is the present value of cash inflow, you divide by the present value of cash outflow. Can you compute for me for A? Give me the profitability index. It should be just engage your calculator. Don't write anything. Don't write anything. You're getting 0.33. 0.33. Let's go to the decision criteria. Should you take project A? Accept or reject? Reject. That's very wrong. Now you are thinking like student, not like financial managers. You see the NPV is positive. If the NPV is positive, that means a viable project. Okay, how do you get the profitability index? Wacha niseme ni kazi ya macho. Is the present value of cash inflow. How much is the present value of cash inflow? 10 is NPV. Are you together? How do we get, how do we get NPV? Is the present value of cash inflow, you raise the present value of cash. Project A generated an NPV of 10 million. I have not given you this. Minus the present value of the cash outflow, the cost was 30. If the cost is 30 and they made a profit of 10, how much was the inflow? So to get X is 10 plus that, you get 40. So This one you have the present value of cash inflow, you take it's 40. You divide by the present value of cash outflow, which is that 4/3 is how much? Eh? 1.33. Are you together? Yeah. So yeah, anyway, that's right. Eh? So we have said that we have two types of capital rationing. One is the soft and hard. Now let's start with A. Soft stroke internally generated capital rationing. Soft stroke internally generated capital rationing. We like to see that. This is the scarcity of investment funds. This is the scarcity. This is the scarcity of. This is the scarcity of investment fund. This is the scarcity of investment fund due to factors within the control of the management. Due to factors within the control of the management. Due to factors within the control of the management. i.e., the shortage is as a result. The shortage is as a result of management action. Is as a result of management action. Is as a result of management action. Yeah, we think that in this case, we are facing the capital rationing due to factors within the control of the management. First, we right to see that it may arise due to the following circumstances. It may arise due to the following circumstances. It may arise due to the following circumstances. Yeah, what gives rise to this capital rationing? Number one, may arise due to the following circumstances. Number one, when the management refuses to issue new shares, when the management refuses to issue new shares to raise the required capital, when the management refuses to issue share to raise the required capital, management refuses to issue additional shares to raise the required capital in order to avoid dilution of ownership and control, in order to avoid dilution of ownership and control, in order to avoid dilution of ownership and control. So I think that in this case, when I take out the viable project, the capital required was 10, but you only had 90. So that means we are facing a shortage of 10 million. Now, in this case, assuming this is a limited company, so the company has an option to issue more shares to raise this required capital. But in this case, the management, they are fearing, if we issue more shares, what will happen? We'll have other shareholders, because for you to issue share, you'll have people subscribing for the share. So, and what will happen if you have more shareholders? What will happen to the ownership? That means you have other owners, eh? And the more you have the owners, that's what we call dilution of management. In case there is dilution of ownership, also the control will be diluted. Number two, when the management refuses to borrow more capital, when the management refuses to borrow more capital, in order to avoid payment of interest, and financial risk, in order to avoid the payment of interest and financial risk. You know, in business, we have two types of risk. We have financial risk. We also have what? Financial risk and business risk. Now, financial risk is the risk associated with the borrowing of funds. Business risk is the risk associated with the declining earnings of the company. So now this is what happened. Now, in this case, the company, they are facing a deficit of 10 and the company is credit worthy. So that means if they approach the bank, they can get the 10 million. But now in this case, they are fearing that if you borrow an additional 10 million, you'll not be given for free, right? You have to pay what? The interest. What's the effect of the interest to the income statement? Interest is an expense. When when expenses increases, what happens to the profit? It reduces the profit. Are you together? So, and in that case, also increases the financial risk. So that's another reason of the internally generated capital ratio. Number three. When the capital projects can only be undertaken when the capital project can only be undertaken through internally generated funds, And the capital projects can only be undertaken through internally generated funds. Now that one is provided on the capital cost of the company. That is well provided in the capital cost that for you to undertake any capital project, you see that capital project, they are long-term projects, we should only use internally generated funds. What are those internally generated funds? Internally generated funds. Sorry? Ron? Prying back the profit. Yes, that's what we call the retained earnings. So in this case, if the company is to take any capital project, you should not borrow. You did use what we call the internally generated fund. And the internally generated funds are the reserves, such as the retained earning of the retained profit. Good. Number four, another circumstance, number four. When the management had set a limit of capital project budget, I said what? Capital budget limit. Where the management had set capital budget limit. What does it mean? Now, this is what happens. Remember, at the start of each financial year, the company to come up with a budget. Yes? Sorry, capital budget limit. Yes, limit, capital budget limit. So you're saying that at the start of each financial year, the company need to prepare a budget. Now, when you're preparing the budget, assume that the investment committee, they had set a budget of 90 million. And then after 1 month, they evaluated this project and realized that this project required 100 million. So there is a shortage of how much? 10. So you go back to the CFO, Chief Financial Controller, Chief Finance Officer. Unampatia budget ya 100. Anakwambia, how much was your budget? How much was the budget? The budget was 90, but now the project requires how much? Then can you go back and you stick to your budget? You see, in this case, it's not that the company does not have money. They have the money. But the policy is that let's stick to our original budget. Good. So now let's look at B. Now that was soft or internally generated capital rationing. Now we look at B, which is hard or externally generated capital rationing. Externally generated capital rationing. Right to say that this is the scarcity of investment fund. This is the scarcity of the investment fund. This is the scarcity of the investment funds due to external factors. due to external factors, i.e. due to external factors, i.e. factors beyond the control of the management, factors beyond the control of the management. Full stop. It may arise due to the following circumstances. It may arise due to the following circumstances. It may arise due to the following circumstances. So now in this case, we are saying that externally, that's the shortage due to factors not within the control of the management. That means for you to get the deficit of 10 million, the management is really willing to get the 10 million. But now there is some external factor hindering that. Which are those circumstances? Number one, when the capital market is depressed, therefore making it difficult to access finances, therefore making it difficult to access finances. Number two, lack of collateral stroke securities, when borrowing. Number three, high demand of investment funds, by well-established company. High demand of investment funds by well-established company. Another one, high cost of borrowing. High cost of borrowing. Good. NB. Either soft or hard. Capital rationing. Can persist for a period less than 1 year. Comma. This is known as single period. Capital rationing. Single period capital rationing. Full stop. However, sometimes the scarcity can persist for more than 1 year. However, sometimes the scarcity can persist for more than 1 year, comma. If this is the case, comma, it is known as, it's known as multi-period. Multi-period capital rationing. Multi-period capital rationing. Good. So I want us to do an illustration. May 2012, question 4B. May 2012, question 4B. ABC Limited has the following proposed independent project for the year ending that 1st of December 2012. So we have project A to E. We have the next investment outlay, present value of the future cash flows required. Assuming that there is no capital rationing, indicate which project should be selected. Assuming there is no capital rationing, that means in this case we have all the funds to undertake all the projects. Which one should be selected? You only select a project if it's viable. How do you measure viability? If the project is profitable. How do you measure profitability in financial management? Using NPV, inflow minus the outflow. So use the net present value, which is the present value of cash inflow, you raise the present value of cash outflow. So you have project A, B, C, D, and E. So you take the present value of cash inflow. So you have the present value of the future net cash flow, you have it's 1,000. We have 25. We have 300. We have 400. We have 300. Then you raise the present value of cash outflow. We already have the net investment outlays. We have 500. We have 1,000, 400, 300, 200. That's how we get 10 PV. So it's 500, 1,500, negative 100, 100, 100. So this one should be accept or reject? This one you should accept. That one is not viable. You accept. You accept. That's number one. Number two, the total net present value of the selected project, total NPV. So to get the total NPV of the selected project, so we have accepted this one, it's 500. We accepted B, 1,500. We accepted D, 100, as well as E, 100. You get a total 2,200. Number three, assuming a single period internal capital constraint of 1.7 million is imposed, indicate which project should be selected. And now assuming that we are facing a capital limit, the maximum we have is 1.7 million. Now the question is, which project should we accept? Now the exam will not tell you to compute profitability index. You see that profitability index is applied whenever there exists capital rationing. So that one we are given the capital limit. So that means the company is facing capital rationing. So when you face capital rationing, now you don't use NPV. We use the profitability index. And how do we get the profitability index? Is the present value of cash inflow divided by the present value of cash outflow. So we have the projects. Project A, B, project C failed the test. Actually, project C, if you are to compute profitability index, you get less than 1. So therefore, you reject. Then we have D, we have E. So take the present value of cash inflow. For A was 1,000, for B was 25, D was 400, here we had is 300. Then we divide by the present value of cash outflow. Project A, the net outlay was 500. Here we had was 1,000. D was 300. Here we had 200. That's how we get the profitability index. Here you get 2.5. 4 over 3, you get 1.33. 3 over 2, you get 1.5. Then we rank. Which one has the highest profitability index? Number 1, number 3, number. So which project should we undertake? So now we do what we call the capital allocation. So the capital available, we only have 1.7. So which project should we undertake? So you give the first priority to the project with the highest profitability index. That's project B. So project B. Project B requires a capital of how much? It requires 1,000. So the balance will be 700. Then we have capital to undertake the next project. So the other most profitable project, rank number 2, is project A. Project A requires a capital of 500. We'll have a balance of 200. We still have more capital, so we can take the next profitable project. Rank number 3 was project E. Project E requires a capital of 200. Get 0. So therefore, the project to undertake, you undertake project B, A, and E. Good. So you can copy now. So now let's look at something else. Single period, right? We write something. Single period capital rationing. Single period capital rationing. Single period capital rationing for indivisible projects. For indivisible projects. For indivisible project. For indivisible projects. May 2018. May 2018, question 4. Let's start with question 4B. 4B. Distinguish between, sorry, no, part C, part 1. C, part 1. C, part 1. Describe two types of capital rationing in capital budgeting. 4 marks. Describe two types of capital rationing. Don't describe, just state. Yes? Soft and hard. Good. Number 2. Amani Contractors Limited is intending to invest in 4 independent projects. The 4 projects are independent. They does not interfere with each other. The following information related to the 4 projects. We have the present value of the cash flows. We have initial outlays. Then we have the NPVs. If you look at the NPVs, for A is positive, B is positive, C is positive, D is positive. So that means all the projects are what? Are viable. So if you have enough or sufficient capital, undertake all the projects, because these projects are independent and all their net present value are positive. So that means the projects are viable. Additional information. The company has a capital limitation of 90 million. So once you see we have a limit of 90 million, the company is facing financial difficulties. I mean, it's facing some financial constraints. The company required rate of return is 10%. That's the same as cost of capital. Any surplus fund can be reinvested to generate a return of net cash flow of 14% to perpetuity. Any surplus fund, in short, any unutilized fund, can be reinvested to generate a return net cash flow of 14% to infinity. Then the projects are indivisible. What are indivisible projects? That these are projects which cannot start generating inflow until they are fully completed. Number 5, the project can be combined to achieve a higher return subject to the company capital limitation. The project can combine. So of this 90, you can apportion to 2 projects. That's what it means. Required. Advise the optimal project combination. The optimal combination. Which project should we combine? Take into consideration you have a limit of how much? 90. So we have the combination. Have the capital required. Then we get the surplus. So then we can have what we call internal NPV. Then you told that any surplus fund can be reinvested to earn a return of 14% to perpetuity. So we can also compute external NPV, and then we get the total NPV. So project combination. Here you have 4 projects. How can we combine them? Can we be able to combine A and B? A and B. How much is the capital required? A requires a capital of how much? Capital is the outlay. 30. What about B? How much is the total? 75. So we can combine A and B. A requires a capital of 30. B requires 45. The total capital required is 70. But how much do we have as a company? 90. So how much will be the surplus? We got an amount of 25 or 15. Good. How much will be the internal NPV? Project A is giving you an NPV of how much? We have is 20. Project B is giving an NPV of 15. So the total is 35. Any other project combination? Can you combine A and C? A requires how much? C requires how much? How much is the total? 90. So we have not exceeded the capital limit. So we can combine A and C, where A requires 30, C requires 60. So we have a total of how much will be the surplus? 0. So internal NPV, A, the NPV is 20. What about project C? C is 40. So you have a total of 60. Can we combine A and D? A requires 30, D requires 40. That's a total of 70. So we can combine A and D. A requires 30, D requires 40. So the total is, we have 90. How much is the surplus? 20. So we get the internal NPV. A, the NPV is 20. What about D? 30. So the internal NPV is 50. Any other project combination? Can we combine B and C? B requires, C requires a total of how much? 105. That one exceeds our capital. So that one we cannot combine. What of B and D? B requires 45, D requires 40. You get a total of 85. So we can combine. So we can combine B and D. B requires a capital of 45. It requires an amount of 40. So the total is 85. We had 90. So how much is the surplus? 5. What about C and D? C requires a capital of 60. D, the total is 100. So that one exceeds our budget. So we cannot undertake that. So now these are all the available combinations. So now let's get the internal NPV. B, how much is the NPV? 15. What about D? 30. You get a total of 45. Good. Now let's compute external NPV. External NPV, let's go to note number 3. Note number 3. Note number 3, we are told that any surplus fund can be reinvested to generate returns of net cash flows of 14% to perpetuity. Any surplus fund can be invested. So now let's compute external NPV. And NPV is the present value of cash inflow, you raise the present value of cash outflow. A and B combined. A and B combined, the surplus is 15. So to get the present value of cash inflow, we invest this 15, of which you expect a return of how much? 14% per annum to perpetuity. 15% of that, 1.4, you add 0.7, you get 2.1, right? 1.4, so 2.1, Amma. Now, this 2.1 is the annual return, but now you want the present value of cash inflow. We discount. How do we discount? How much is the cost of capital? %. For how many years? Sasa mnasoma nini hapo? Hii project ni ya miaka ngapi? 4. Aya. Someni mara ya 5 sasa. Note number 3. Soma number 3 mara ya 5. Tumeambiwa that any surplus fund can be invested to generate return of net cash flow 14% to perpetuity. That means to infinity. How do we get the present value of an annuity till infinity? Who can remember? Iko kwa hizo vitabu zenyu. It's A over what? A over R. It's annuity over R. If you're generating annuity to infinity, this one you cannot get it from the table because the table has specific years. So it's A over R. So the annuity will be 2.1 to infinity over R. R is the cost of capital, which is 10%. 10%, 0.1. 2.1 divided by 0.1, you get 21. So objective is to get NPV. To get NPV, you take the present value of cash inflow. Now, this is our present value of cash inflow. We raise present value of cash outflow. A and B. How much is the present value of cash outflow? Give me a wrong answer. Should I evaluate A and B? How much is the capital? Sijasema mniangalie, nimwangalie swali mnipe jibu. Kuna watu wananiangalia hivi. It's an amount of 70? Very wrong. Si tumeambiwa any surplus fund can be invested. So we are investing the surplus fund of how much? So this 15 is the one earning 14%. Eh? So the capital to invest is this 15 million. So how much is our NPV? NPV is 6. Kwa kama huku shika hiyo, shika the next one. A and B, there is no surplus, right? So there will be no external. Now let's do A and D. A and D, the present value of an annuity till infinity, 14%, and how much we invest? The surplus fund, which is, now this 20 is what we're investing now, so becomes our present value of cash outflow. So it's 14% of 20. 20% of 1.4, so you get 2.8. Ama? Yes, confirm. Can you confirm? The easier is to take 20% of 14. 10% of 14 in ngapi? In 1.4. Kwa hivyo 20 itakuwa ngapi? Just double. Inakuja ngapi? So now that's the present value. Sorry, this is the annual cash flows. But we want the present value of cash inflow. So we say that it's A over R. This is the annuity over R, which is 10%, and you get an amount of 20. So this one becomes the present value of cash inflow. So to get NPV, you raise the present value of cash outflow. AD, how much are you investing? Good, we are investing this 20, the surplus fund. So our NPV will be 8. Lastly, B and D. B and D, the surplus was 5. If we invest this 5, we'll earn a return of 14% per annum to perpetuity. 14% of 5, 1.4 get 0.7. Ama? So to get the present value of cash inflow of an annuity infinity, it's A over R. So it'll be 0.7 over R, which is 10%, and you get 7. Then you take this is the present value of cash inflow. You raise the present value of cash outflow. How much are you investing? 5. So how much is our NPV? Good. Now let's get the total NPV. Internal NPV was that 5, external NPV is 6. You get an amount of 60 plus 0, you get 50 plus 8, you get 45 plus 2, you get 40. Optimal project combination. Give me the optimal project combination. A and good. It's A. Good. Can copy now. Number 5, internal rate of return. IRR, right? We see that. This is the required rate of return. This is the required rate of return. This is the required rate of return where NPV is 0, where NPV is 0, where NPV is 0. Full stop. The decision criteria is as follows. Decision criteria is as follows. Number 1. If IRR is greater than the cost of capital, you accept the project. Number 2, if IRR is less than the cost of capital, you reject the project. But if the internal rate of return is equal to the cost of capital, that's the point of indifference. Point of indifference. IRR is computed. IRR is computed depending with the nature of cash flows. IRR is computed depending with the nature of cash flows as follows. Depending with nature of cash flows as follows. Depending with the nature of cash flows as follows. A. Annuity cash flows to infinity. In case of annuity cash flows to infinity, how do you get IRR? You take the annuity over the present value of cash outflow times 100%. Illustration. Consider a project whose initial investment, consider a project whose initial investment is 250 million shillings. Whose initial investment is 250 million shillings. Full stop. The project is expected to generate. The project is expected to generate. The project is expected to generate annual cash flows. The project is expected to generate annual cash flows of 40 million per annum, of 40 million per annum, of 40 million per annum to perpetuity. 40 million per annum to perpetuity. Full stop. Determine IRR of the project. Determine the IRR. Determine the IRR of the project. So say that in case the project is generating annuity to infinity, you take the annuity, which is 40 million, you divide by the present value of cash outflow. This project will require 250 million to invest times 100. So what do you get? 40 over 25, you get? $16%. 16%. You can show that. Number B, in case of a 1-year project, then you write that formula. Illustration. 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 Consider a 1-year project. Consider a 1-year project. Consider a 1-year project. Consider a 1-year project whose initial investment is 12 million. Consider a 1-year project whose initial investment is 12 million. And it's expected to generate 15 million. And it is expected to generate 15 million at the end of the year. It's expected to generate 15 million at the end of the year. Also, determine IRR of the project. Determine IRR. Determine IRR of the project. Determine IRR of the project. So say that in this case, in case of a 1-year project, IRR, you'll take the future value. This project is for 1 year. How much do you expect to generate at the end of year 1? 15. How much are you investing? That's the present value of cash outflow. 12, and then you minus 1. Mean percentage form. Got? Yes? 25. 25%. Good. Can copy? So number 6, in case of a single future cash flows in period N, that's the formula. Then number D, in case of annuity cash flows for specific period. So I want us to do the previous question we had done before. Open with me December 27, question 1. That was the first illustration we had done when we were evaluating NPV. December 27, question 1B. Question 1B. Mapeni Limited is considering which of the following mutually exclusive projects to invest in. See that mutually exclusive projects, they are projects which compete against each other. Each project will generate cash flows over a 3-year period. So we have project M and we have project N. We have the cost. Both of them requires 10 million. Now, for project M, now let's look at project M. Project M, year 1, year 2, year 3, generating 555. So that means that's what we call an annuity cash flow for specific period. Let's go to project N. You look at the cash flow characteristic of project N. Project N, year 1 is generating nothing. Year 2, it generates nothing. But year 3, it generates around some amount of 17.28. So now that's our part C here. In case of a single future cash flow for period N. So we see that IRR will be computed based on the cash flow characteristic required. Now, then you are told that the cost of capital for each project is 10% required. Advise the company on which project to implement using net present value. We did that one. And the internal rate of return. So now let's use the internal rate of return. So using the internal rate of return, we start with project M. Project M. Project M, year 1 is generating 5, year 2, 5, year 3, 5. That's what we call an annuity cash flow for specific period. So to get IRR, you take the present value of cash outflow, you divide by the annuity. Present value of cash outflow, you're investing 10 million. Annuity cash flow, it's 5. And you get an amount of 2. But this 2 is not the internal rate of return. Project M was for how many years? 3 years. So how do we get IRR? So now let's go to our annuity table. Go to our annuity table. Annuity table. You have the annuity table. The project is for 3 years. Let's go to the third year. Go to the third year of the annuity table. Are we there? Now look across. Look across where you have 2. Where you have 2. Look across where you have 2. I've said you go to the third year of the annuity table. Then you look across where we have 2. I know it's not there. It's in between something. Can you read what we have? It's in between what and what? Sijasema mniangalie, nimwangalie swali mniambie niko wapi. Angalia hapo juu, ina lie between which percent and which percent. Sio ni kuangalia tu, hiyo ni kazi ya macho. $20 and 24, good. It lies in between 24 and 20, so IRR is in between. Now give me for 24. 24, it's 1.9. 81. 20%. 2.1065. Then the IRR we need is 2. What does it mean? IRR is between 20 and 24. So that means our IRR will be 20 something, but should not exceed 24. So how do we get the specific IRR? To get the specific IRR, you take IRR minus the lower limit. You divide by the upper limit minus lower limit. This is what I mean. You take IRR, so it lies in between 24 and 20. So the lower limit will be 20%. So you minus 20%. Upper limit is 24. So you take the upper limit, which is 24, minus lower limit, which is 20. Then you substitute. IRR is 2 minus, for 20%, we have is 2.1065. 24%, here we have it's 1.9081. Then you minus for 20%, and for 20% we have is 2.1065. So it will be IRR minus 20. 24 minus 20 you get 4 is equals to, can you compute this? Compute that, give me the answer. $0.5367. Then once we have that, you cross multiply. So if you cross multiply, so it would be IRR minus 20, 4 times answer. Yes. 2.1468. Now what we need is IRR. So to get IRR, take this negative 20 to the other side, so it becomes a positive. So it will be 22.15%. As simple as that. So that was for project M. Let's do project N. Project N. Now project N, year 1 is generating nothing, year 2 is generating nothing, then it generates annual cash, lump sum amount at the end of year 3. So in case of a single future cash flow in period A, how do we get IRR? So you'll take the future value over the present value of cash outflow, nth root minus 1. So it will be, you take the future value, how much are you generating at the end of year 3? You have 17.28, divided by the present value of cash outflow, 10. How many years? 3, you minus 1, give it that. What are you getting? Give me in percentage. Give me in percentage. 20%. You have not answered the question. You have been told that the two projects are mutually exclusive. You choose one. So how do you make decision under IRR? Can you go back to the decision criteria? How do you make a decision? Yes. If IRR is greater than what? How much was the cost of the capital of the project? Ilikuwa ngapi? 10. Is this project viable? Is this project viable? Both of them, they are viable, but they are mutually exclusive. You choose one. Which one you will choose? The one with the high IRR. So you should undertake project M. Now, before you copy, let's go where you had NPV. Go back where you wrote about NPV. The first illustration you did was this question, NPV. So you have net present value. We did that one in our last class. This was the first illustration. Can you go back to the comment section? Comment section. Which project did you accept it? You accepted project N. IRR, we have accepted which project? A. So you see that one of the disadvantages of the two methods is that sometimes there will be conflicting results. According to NPV, we accepted N. IRR, we have accepted N. So in case the two projects conflict, so we'll come to discuss that. What leads to conflict between IRR and NPV? In case there is any conflict between IRR and NPV, always the NPV will prevail. Are you together? Always NPV will prevail. And what are some of the reasons that give rise to the conflict? We'll come to discuss later. So you can copy that. Can do the last illustration. November 2015. Question 3B. November 2015, question 3B. The following details relate to a capital project of XYZ Limited. We have the project cost, annual cash flows after tax, project economic life, 5 years, required rate of return, 12%. Required internal rate of return or required. Assess the suitability of the capital project using the following methods. Number one is the internal rate of return, IRR. So first of all, the first thing, you look at the cash flow characteristic to determine which formula now to use. So the project cost is 65, annual cash flow is 21, the project is for 5 years. That's what we call, in case of an annuity cash flow for a specific period of time. So to get IRR, you take the present value of cash outflow, you divide by the annuity. Present value of cash outflow we have is 65 million. Annual cash flows we have is 21. So give me that into 4 decimal places. Into 4 decimal places. Sorry? 09? 0952. 52. Then the project was for 5 years. Now, this is not the internal rate of return. So to get the internal rate of return, the project was for 5 years. Let's go to the annuity table. Annuity table. Let's go to the 5th year. 5th year of the annuity table. Then can you look across? Just look across. We have 3.0952. 3.0952. It's in between 18 and 20 IRR we have. So give me for 20. 18. Then IRR, we need it's 9.0952. So how do we get IRR? We say that you take IRR, you minus the lower limit. The lower limit is 18%. You divide by the upper limit minus lower limit. So 20 minus 18. Then you substitute. IRR, it's 3.0952 minus, for 18%, we have it's 3.1272. For 20%, we have it's 2.9906. For 18%, we have it's 3.1272. So it will be IRR minus 18. 20 minus 18, you get 2. Now, can you compute this? Give me that. You're getting 0.2342. Good. So it will be, now you cross multiply. So IRR minus 18, if you cross multiply, it will be 2 times 0.2343, you get? This one you get 0.4686. You take this to the other side. So IRR will be 18.47%. That's why you're getting your 5 marks. Number 2 of the question. Number 2. So now we have to make a conclusion. Remember, you are told that you assess the suitability of the capital project. How much was the cost of capital? So now let's do part 2. Part 2, we have to assess using the profitability index. So profitability index is the present value of cash inflow. You divide by the present value of cash outflow. So how do we get the present value of cash inflow? So we have the annual cash flows, which is 21 million times present value interest factor of an annuity. The cost of capital is 12%. The project is for 5 years. So 21 times 12% for 5 years. Using the annuity table. Sorry, 6048. And so now give me the present value of cash inflow. 71.554. So that's the present value of cash inflow. You get 70. So now that's the present value of cash inflow. So therefore, to get the profitability index, you take the present value of cash inflow, which is 75.7. You divide by the present value of cash outflow. How much was the cost of this project? Give me the answer. Get 1 point. $164. So you accept the project. You know why. Also, you can evaluate using NPV, so it's not part of the requirement. So NPV is the present value of cash inflow minus the present value of cash outflow. The present value of cash inflow is 75.7. Present value of cash outflow is 65, but you get 10.7. So also, if you are to use NPV, accept the project. You can copy. So now, once you're done copying, remember you're evaluating IRR. So you have reached number 4. So you copy this number 5. That's why we'll start in our next class. And keep on preparing the cut. So the week that starts on 20th will also have an FM cut, both FM and FR.